Hey, good morning and welcome to the New Breed of Business. I'm here today with Kyle Stark from Stark Contrast. I met Kyle when I was down in Florida recently for a series of Unity meetings, which were called briefings. It's actually an extraordinary time of Christian community together. And Kyle was the facilitator of the whole thing and did an incredible job leading everybody. I just love when unity gatherings happen and the catalysts of unity are especially those who are used in that kind of way to facilitate things. So thanks to you, brother, for doing that. And then I found out all sorts of interesting things about Kyle's heart and where he's coming from and where he's going. And he's going with Jesus. So welcome this morning, brother.
Awesome to be here, Greg. No, I appreciate the intro and yeah, awesome to see how God works.
Yeah, totally. So, hey, man, part of what is great about your story and situation is what you were focused on as a young man, how you grew up in your career, and then what God was up to and how he used that in your life. So, one of the things we put in the write-up is you were involved with a couple of Major League Baseball organizations, I think Cleveland and then Pittsburgh, and perhaps you were a player also in the beginning. Um, but what's really cool about it is when you went through your experience with the Pirates, one of these movies that I really love, which is called Million Dollar Arm, is about this incredible story. It's totally unusual of where this guy, JB Bernstein, a sports agent, went over and did this reality television program and they wanted to find a couple of cricketers, or they wanted to find cricketers and bowlers, see if they could turn them into pitchers. And anyway, while you were at the Pirates, those guys were there as part of the organization, so that was kind of interesting to me too. The cool thing about that story is JB Bernstein goes from fame, fortune, money seeking to, in the movie anyway, the way they portrayed it, the discovery of how important the relationship is with people, how he really loved these kids coming out of India, and that was the most important thing, and about family. So, brother, tell us a little bit about your story growing up, how you came to faith, why baseball was your thing, and it's great having you.
Yeah, but before I dive into that, I'll touch on Rinku and Dinesh.
Yes.
We got to when we got to Pittsburgh. You know, small market teams, one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. Not good at the major league level at the time, not good in the minor league system, and we knew we were going to have to do things differently. And so this was an opportunity we explored in terms of, hey, does this give us access to a market that maybe other teams aren't pursuing? And so we were on the ground floor with Rinku and Dinesh, and just a fascinating journey to take two guys. When you're in player development and you're trying to train guys to be major league players, not too often do you have two players come in as an entry point having never played at all. And
Sure.
so that just it stretch tested a bunch of different philosophies and ideas we had. But it was fun to shepherd those two guys on their journey. Neither one of them made it to the big leagues, but both have gone on to do some different things in their lives. Rinku actually is a professional wrestler now. Has stayed in touch with him. But it's a reminder of
Status.
how God weaves all these different stories together, and not in ways that necessarily you expect. So
Totally. Yeah, actually, you saying that reminds me of another great movie, The Moneyball, about how it's another small team, Oakland, had to do something different. So I guess they were one of the pioneers in cybermetrics.
yeah,
But
yep.
I just love that story, like especially the way they portrayed it. I thought they did a great job. I'm always criticized by my wife Bridget by we are not watching that movie again. So I just love the story. It's kind of one of those come from nowhere and feel good movies of the year.
Very much so. Very much so.
Well, yeah. So where did you grow up, man?
Yeah, so grew up in Bradford, Pennsylvania, small town in rural northwest Pennsylvania. Um, Grew up. My parents Just grew up in a great Christian home, grew up solid foundations. My dad, worked in the oil field, so very much blue collar work ethic. My dad then went back, got his master's degree, and ended up running a cardiac rehab facility. But grew up in rural Pennsylvania without a lot of resources and means, and fell in love with baseball at an early age. I joke
How
with
far
people that
west is Bradford, by the way? Is that like center of the state or where's
it's
that? It's
about a
probably
third of the way across the state, right on the New York PA line. So hour and a half from Buffalo, hour and a half from Erie, Pennsylvania.
right on.
Yep. So I joke with people that I wanted to be a major league baseball player, and God revealed to me that that wasn't going to happen sooner than I would have liked. Um, but along that journey, I think, and you mentioned Moneyball, but I started, so there were some changes that were happening in baseball in terms of front offices. And so I said, well, if I'm not going to be able to play at the highest level, I'd like to lead at the highest level. And
Yeah.
so set off on a pursuit to try to be a general manager and lead an organization.
So you played ball in college?
I actually played volleyball in college. I
Okay.
had opportunities to play baseball, just was a better opportunity, and felt like God was calling me to Ball State in Muncie, Indiana. And so was able to be around the volleyball program there, and then and again, just awesome how God works. Opened up some doors. My last year or two there, ended up working with one of the assistant athletic directors at Ball State, who had some baseball, had coached college baseball, and had been a scout, and just opened up some doors and just some perspectives into the world of professional baseball.
Great. So you grew up in a household of faith. So you were sort of a believer from a young age.
Yeah, I tell people my dad's the best example of Jesus I've ever been around, just as far as modeling what that looks like. My dad actually sang in a gospel quartet. My mom played the piano in worship. So both my mom led me to Christ. Just both parents laid that foundation. And then you go back, my grandma, she's 95, just a prayer warrior, matriarch of the faith of the family, just a legacy of faith that runs throughout our family.
Awesome. That's similar to my story. Got my dad here on the line. Dad, are you like Jesus too? He's muted, but yeah, we grew up in a household of faith, and that's how I came to faith as well. Credit to my mom and dad raising me that way. So yeah, that's a thing. That's
Is
actually
it
a good
okay
thing.
is it okay if I ask Alma next time I'm at a
You can ask my mom. Her 85th birthday is coming right up. So
Oh really? Oh wow. Okay.
yeah, my mom's awesome. Same with my dad. So hey, back to you. You had this connect. He was a scout out of baseball. So baseball, probably one of your loves growing up, at least in grade school and all. And so tell us about how that opened up for you.
Yeah, so Ball State again just started lining things up to pursue this vision of being a general manager. So I went to Ball State, majored in sport management. Now everybody and their brothers majoring in sport management, but that wasn't a thing necessarily when I was going to school. Very
Right.
very few programs. And so did that, and then as I finished up at Ball State, decided, okay, looking for ways to differentiate myself, and so went to University of Toledo and got my law degree. Helped the baseball program there. Missed the game and being around the game, and so a good friend of mine was the head coach at St. Bonaventure University in New York State. I had ran his camps back in the day, and so connected with him. He said he had a coaching position open, so I went there, got my MBA, coached at St. Bonaventure. And then at that point, back in the day when you still wrote handwritten letters to everybody trying to find a job, I wrote 30 major league clubs wanting to get in, and was fortunate to get responses from some different organizations. And Cleveland was the best opportunity to start with in the front office there.
So you had a dream for quite a while to break into the major leagues in an administrative and managerial fashion. Your vision was to be a GM.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
funny. I actually coached with Steve Phillips right here in my town here in Wilton,
Yep.
and he was a GM for the Mets for a while.
Yep.
Uh, so it's an interesting world. We'll say that for sure.
It is, and I think
Front
coming from
office.
a small town in Pennsylvania, we were 3 hours from the nearest major league team. I think probably when I talked about being a general manager, I think most people probably thought I was nuts. A small town kid, no connections, didn't play professional baseball, and at that time was still the normal path was you played and then transitioned that way. So I'm sure a lot of people looked at me like I was nuts. But I
Outsider.
felt like this was a passion of mine. It was something I wanted to pursue, and I went after it.
Yeah, and so like with me, I had a vision of what my career would look like, this whole Wall Street desire, and it came to pass. And I later in life credit God for opening up a lot of things that might not have otherwise opened up. He does tell us in the scriptures, right, that he gives us the desire of our heart. So that was the desire of your heart. You broke in, you were an outsider. Yeah, so tell us about your stint in Cleveland and then on to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, the cool thing again, you talk about, and again, that's where I just amazed at God's creativity because He's the only one that can orchestrate this. Yeah, I've got a vision. I worked hard to pursue it, but the doors that are open, the connections,
Yeah.
how those steps get orchestrated, completely a God thing. So get the opportunity with Cleveland. Again, unique spot in Cleveland where Cleveland was progressive in terms of they were taking some chances on some non-traditional backgrounds. And so, when I was in Cleveland, I think there were probably 6, 8 guys in the front office that ended up going on and being general managers. And there was a wave of guys before that. And a lot of those guys are really smart, talented leaders who didn't play. And so small front office, progressive in how they looked at things, lots of opportunity, not afraid to give opportunity to things. And so, it was a unique time for me to be around some really talented people to learn from, but also tons of opportunity, not just to learn, but to actually make a difference and impact some things. So, Cleveland really gave me a unique foundation in terms of from a front office lens what it can look like, but also just organizationally. They were the general manager at the time, Mark Shapiro, was committed to driving culture. A lot of really good people there. That wanted to learn or wanted to teach and mentor and help. So just a unique spot for me at that point in my life. And then from there, so I worked with Neil Huntington in Cleveland, and then Neil ends up getting the general manager job in Pittsburgh,
Uh,
and he was allowed to take somebody with him, and so he hired me as his director of player development.
so what would you say your differentiation was? What was your calling card, if you will, or how did you have favor? I mean, there's God's favor in this, but what was your thing? Like, why did people give you these opportunities? How would you how would you put that?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one, we I think sometimes we overemphasize work ethic, but sometimes I think we underemphasize work ethic, and so the willingness to just work harder and do more, you create opportunities, and you're around more. That when you're around all the time, you have access to things, and you get things thrown your way. So I think that's part of it. I think the ability to deliver well in that space. I think the other thing that was unique for me because I consider myself a generalist. I think I've been around a lot of people that are specialists and really good in lanes. And so my dad used to always joke around being a jack, being a jack of trades versus a master, and being able to do a lot of things competently. And so having coached gave me some foundation and development and perspective in coaching and leading, the law degree, the MBA. So I brought a perspective from a lot of different areas. So I was able to be in a lot of different rooms and connect a
Yeah,
lot of dots.
that's an unusual background. The fact that you have I didn't even know that you have a law degree, you have a business degree, you have a sports management degree. How did your legal toolkit like help, like from your perspective?
Yeah, I used to joke. People would be like, "Wow, you must be really smart," and I'm like, "Well, I got a law degree and an MBA, and I'm making $600 a month, so I don't know how smart I really am." um, But and a lot of times when people will ask for career guidance and schooling, I think the thing about a law degree is that it trains you how to think. To be honest, I've never really used my law degree from a a technical perspective. There were a few projects in Cleveland that I got roped in on because I had a law degree, but again, it was more that I got invited to the table because I had it, as opposed to that I really used it. But what I think a law degree does do is it does train you how to think. It trains you how to solve problems. And so, that's where I think that probably had the biggest impact. And you're in a very competitive environment, where results matter. And so you're used to operating in that type of world.
Interesting. Um, yeah. So take us into the Pirates, and I saw on your resume you were assistant GM and then became vice president of something. I don't know if it's only one vice president or several, but just you kind of got to where you wanted to be, at least almost. Maybe you wanted to be a GM, but tell us about that. Like
Yeah,
how
I
did
think the cool thing for me about Pittsburgh, so get hired as the director of player development, so responsible for all the minor leagues. And again, knew we were the worst team in the big leagues, lowest payrolls, bad farm system, so we knew we had a lot of work to do, and knew we were going to have to do it different. And so we dove into um, knew we were going to have to develop our own players. Knew that was going to have to be a separator for us, and so we just sold out to trying to build the best development system in baseball. And so we started uh, trying to learn from. I think excellence is excellence, and so if somebody's doing something well, we can go learn from it and then go try to apply it in our situation. And so we started partnering with best practices with elite people in a lot of different sports, but also in outside of sport. And so built this community of constant growth and development, learning from other people, trying to make sense of what is our identity, what does that look like for us. And along the way, I think again, God put that passion in my heart for baseball, and I thought it was to be a general manager. And I think it was more as I dove into it, my focus shifted from that position to to really be having a heart for leadership and leading a group of men towards a common goal, helping them achieve individual and collective um, accomplishments and goals, and doing it in an environment where people feel really committed to a purpose and are more cause driven as opposed to next job driven. And so I think that shift for me then changed how I led during that time. Was able to be promoted and continue to expand the responsibilities that were thrown my way, but the focus shifted from the position to the pursuit of leadership.
right? Now, this is the fun part. So when you were there and you had achieved much, maybe much more than others might have thought was possible coming from a non-baseball professional background. What happened then? Talk about your transition period, unless there's something else you want to highlight there in terms of leadership. Obviously, a lot of these skills that you're talking about roll into who you are and what you're doing, even in the kingdom. So tell us about the transition. Tell us about what happened and how it was a blessing in disguise, or however you would describe it. Just go for that.
Yeah, I got fired in 2019. I'd been there 12 years, which really, when you step back, you know, we were able to turn the organization around, had success in the big leagues, had accomplished a lot of things. And you think about 12 years in any place at that level is significant. I think when you're in it, you don't necessarily appreciate it.
Sure.
But looking back, definitely a significant run. But we had gotten to a spot where 12 years is a long time. I've spent time talking to leaders in a lot of different arenas who kind of said, after 10 years, it's like God probably has to do. It's really hard to go beyond. It's like that 10-year window. There's something about that time frame. Um, so 12 years, organization goes through a change, new president, new general manager. And so, I'm asked to go do something else. And so I'll tell the quick story. I'm at the general managers meetings representing the organization. I'm flying home and I get a text from the president, the new president saying, "Hey, are you going to be in the office tomorrow?" At this point, we had moved to Florida. And so I said, I'm planning on being up in Pittsburgh on Monday, but I can bounce up tomorrow. This would have been Thursday if you need. And he says, "Yeah, why don't you?" So I land, I call my wife and I said to her, I said, "Hey, I need to go to Pittsburgh tomorrow. I'm going to get fired." And
Yeah.
she said, "They told you that?" And I said, "No, but I know what, how this
Yeah.
works." And so fly up. So it's funny that morning, we still joke about it to this day. Friday morning, I get up. Um, we still our youngest was still at home. He was getting ready to go to school. I said, "Hey, have a great day at school." I said, "I'm going up to get fired. I'll see you at dinner." And that's what happened. Flew up, got fired, and flew home for dinner with the family. But in that stretch, my wife shared with me that she had been praying for 2 years that God would take me out of baseball. We still joke to this day. I'm like, "Hey, and could you give me a little heads up if you're praying those prayers?"
What a
God
wife.
orchestrates
Hey,
these
I'm
things for
praying for
sure.
your demise.
Yeah.
No. So, yeah, so she's been praying for 2 years, but now give us some insight because people go through this kind of stuff. It can be traumatic. People have their identity oftentimes rolled around their career. And then there's the financial fear aspect of what will I do now? How am I going to pay for these things? But start with your wife's prayer. Why is she praying for you to come out of baseball?
Yeah, I think it was purely our family. I was on the road about 20 to 25 days a month for 12 years. And we made it work because, they would travel with me a lot and we were very intentional with our time together. But that's a lot of time away. And my wife's a saint. She's unbelievable to be able to raise two boys in that dynamic. Our youngest at the time was 12 and our youngest is wired way more like dad than mom, and so he can be a little bit tough. And she knew that he needed dad around more. She needed me around more. She would never ask me to leave that pursuit, but I think she was asking God to have me leave that pursuit. And yeah, so it was purely she needed her husband around more, and Coop needed his dad around more.
So tell us about like why weren't you guys like living by three rivers? So like what why were you living in different places or why do you have to travel all over?
Yeah.
Give us a window
Yeah.
on that.
So when we got the job, we moved to Pittsburgh, and again, awesome how God works. So Bradenton, Florida, is the Pirate spring training home,
Ah, okay.
and so I was in Florida probably 20 to 22 weeks of the year between spring training, instructional league. We would hold the draft down there, and then visits to our minor league affiliates here. But my job initially was as overseeing our minor league system, which was 9 teams spread across 3 different countries. There was only one way I knew how to do the job, and that was to be present with the guys. And so I was on the road with them.
Yeah.
3 years in, my wife and Heather's came to me and said, "Hey, you're not in Pittsburgh. Why are we living in Pittsburgh? Can we at least move to Bradenton?" And so I went to my boss and asked, and he said yes. And I mean, I've never seen my wife move so fast. She got a realtor. We were looking, and we looked for a little bit, and then she just had a strong sense, and I did as well, that God was not done with us in Pittsburgh. And so we did not move to Bradenton. Fast forward 10, 11 years later, our oldest graduates high school. And at that point, she was done with the gray winters of Pittsburgh. And we did move to Bradenton. So God had orchestrated a few things. We were living in Bradenton at this point now when I ended up getting fired, which was, again, completely different transition. I was in the middle of a 4-year contract, so there was no panic of needing to provide for the family from a financial perspective that way. So there was freedom to explore some different things. So again, God orchestrated this move, potentially. Again, it's all about perspective, but potentially easier than a lot of people have to go through that type of transition.
Sure.
You're dealing with the public nature of it, but he had moved us to Bradenton, which, come to find out, there were a number of reasons for that. And financially, there was not a, hey, I have to go find a job immediately.
Yeah, right. So, in a way, it was a relief, perhaps. I mean, how did you feel about it? What were your emotions? I mean, you talked about the public aspect, which gets into pride and humility. It sounds like you have grasped it well. You're happy to say I got fired, no shame in that. So just talk about that a little bit. Like, how did your ego feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a constant battle. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was a general manager and he had gotten fired here the last couple of years. Again, cool how God uses this story. I've been able to walk alongside a number of leaders navigating getting fired because of my own experiences. And the reality is, like, if you set out to be a general manager or whatever type at that level, you're getting fired at some point. I mean, it's
Sure.
just the nature
Only
of the business.
so many spots.
Yeah. So, but I was having a conversation with him and I said, and he's a believer. I said, hey, your identity is in Christ, so you'll be fine. And he said to me, he said, Kyle, if I'm honest though, since I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a big leaguer. If I'm honest with myself, too much of my identity has been wrapped up in baseball. And so I think that is the fight, right? Like, even though we are, um, yeah, even though we're following Christ, and even though that's where our identity is, if we're honest with ourselves, there's still some element that's still rooted in this world, and God's continuing to root that out of us.
Totally.
Um, and so I think that journey for me, knowing I was going to get fired at some point, I was kind of mentally prepared. Having my identity, at least predominantly in Christ, allowed me to navigate that differently. But there is a human aspect of it of you got fired and you navigate whatever else. And then I think the other part of it was I knew in my heart that my time was it was time for me to move on. When I negotiated my last contract in Pittsburgh, I had a conversation with my boss and said, "Hey, if we don't evolve and change some things, it's probably time for me to move on anyway." And so, if I'm honest, God was probably telling me to go then, and I was stubborn and didn't. So I recognized my time. It was time for next. I think the last thing I'll say on this that God did for me in this is we went through a pretty public thing. I guess it was 3 or 4 years into Pittsburgh, where we were trying some different training practices, and it became a national headline of yeah, we had partnered with the special operations world in the military to talk about how they do training, and so we were doing some things a little bit different. Got publicly ridiculed. And so I had navigated kind of that media stuff before, and so it wasn't necessarily new to me. I'd have a lot of people say not very nice things about me publicly, so I've been used to
All right. We're going to try to keep it positive and encouraging right here, Kyle. So
it.
hopefully you've got nothing to fear here. Um, I want to talk about back to identity for a second because it reminded me of a situation and what God did in my life. I had a dream before I went through this whole financial trial and coming out of starting a hedge fund into what God wanted to do with me in ministry. And this dream reveal, I was sort of at a checkout counter or something, perhaps a supermarket or whatever, in this dream. And the person at the counter took away from me my driver's license and my credit card. And I was like, really, like, what's going on here? Why did you do that? Why are you taking that from me? And there was like no negotiating out of it. There was like no way I was getting back my driver's license and my credit card. And later, I had this experience with God about my identity and understanding. I'm trying to separate your identity from Wall Street and the way the world looks at people who work, successfully in Wall Street. And I didn't quite understand that. And then I lost my actual driver's license for a period of time. What's funny is I found it later, much later, because I was actually filling out a baseball form of all things to coach, and they wanted my driver's license. So I had left it on our scanner for like years and never found it. And so anyway, I found that later. But when I got my new driver's license, it was interesting because the date of issue, I think, of the license was the same date which has a lot of meaning for myself and my dad for that matter, of April 19th, which is Patriots Day, which is the day that the American Revolution began. And so all of that to me spoke to God was saying, look, your identity is wrapped up in your career and who people think you are through what you do and the success you have or you don't have. And I'm taking that away from you. And the credit card piece was taking away the financial part, financial strength, like us going to running out of money and God working together with that. But identity is such a huge thing. And there is great freedom when our identity is no longer connected with what the world values or to please men or to, make people, hey, that's a real someone over there. That's a death process. That's like part of even an awakening to Christ is the crucifixion of self. And there's a great power in that, and there's a great freedom in that. So for anyone listening to this and watching, like the fact that you have the freedom to say, yeah, I got fired, it's not the end of the world because in the eternal plane of forever, does it really matter like what those opportunities were when we were younger? Not so much, but what we carry out of that and into really the most fruitful phase of our lives is what God is doing next. So maybe you want to share a little bit now about stark contrast, what you're up to, how you're seeing God open things up. Like what I saw was a real blessing and fruitful in how you were leading a group of Christian leaders in your area. And there's so much behind that I think God can use. So tell us about stark contrast and what your passion is today.
Yeah, that it's been an interesting ongoing journey. I think as you think about that identity piece, because one of the things we try to do as we developed, the core of our development philosophy in Pittsburgh was turning boys into men, and this idea that we felt like, okay, men play in the big leagues. If you want to win a championship, we're talking about dependable men. And so who you are matters. Not, and so a big part of that was trying to train guys to understand that this to separate between what you do and who you are. And so really laying a foundation of who you are, your identity. And so, as I transitioned, I get fired. My wife says to me, she says, can you give me 6 months before you jump into anything? And she said, I'd ask for a year, but I know you won't do that. And so I said, sure. And, I'm thinking, okay, this is transition into next, as opposed to, no, God's pivoting. This is not next job. And so over the course of those 6 months, two things happened. One was a number of people and relationships that I had developed over time started reaching out and saying, hey, what are you doing now? Would you spend some time with me, with my program, with my organization, with whatever? The second thing that happened was COVID hit.
Right.
So I was actually with a college baseball team down here in Florida. They were on their spring trip the day that everything blew up. And they played their game. I was with the coaching staff. They played their game. We go grab something to eat afterwards. The NCAA cancels their basketball tournament. Everything just rapid succession. And you can see the panic and fear, just spreading throughout sport. And so the world stops. and so there was no rush to go to whatever is next. And I think a number of leaders that had reached out were like, hey, how do I navigate this with my team, this is a completely different landscape. So I was able to walk alongside some people that way.
Cool.
When I first got fired, my wife and I talked about, they said, hey, we had some friends, we had done some work with a baseball organization in Europe. And so we said, hey, let's go to Europe for a little bit. And so my wife was geeked. She was excited. And every time we get to a spot where we needed to plan something, she goes like, I'm just unsettled about going. And I'm like, you were always just go, go, go. And well, sure enough, COVID happens. We would have been in Europe when the borders got shut down and everything else. So God protected us there. So we ended up going camping for the summer and had an epic camping trip. Again, as simple as you can get. Um, I came from a world of baseball and excessive wealth to just the simplicity of God's creation, staying in a tent. It was awesome, and we realized that we actually liked hanging out with each other. I joked with people for years that the key to our marriage was me not getting overexposed, and we got a chance to really spend a lot of time together and enjoyed it. And so in that, we just kind of got the sense, and probably my stubbornness has resisted some of this, was no, I'm supposed to walk alongside other leaders right now, as opposed to lead, my own organization or whatever else. And I think part of that is God continuing to reveal for me the difference between ownership and stewardship. It's not your organization. You're stewarding this that he's granted you. He's gifted you this group of people, this organization, whatever else. And so letting go of some of that and just walking along some leaders as they are leading their organizations has been fulfilling for me. And so I find myself in a place of a multitude of different arenas: sport, military, business, education, faith, whatever. And then being asked to partner with leaders to essentially help them solve problems, whether that's themselves trying to grow and be a better performer themselves, whether it's assessing and advising their organization and their operation, or whether it's trying to build community of leaders to learn from each other, sharpen each other, pour into each other, encourage each other. And so it's been fun to see how God continues to unfold this.
Yeah, so I know some of the work that you've done together with Steve Shenbaum. We actually had Steve on a few years back talking about his organization, Game On. It's probably been fun to collaborate with people like that, people who are believers in Christ. What tell us about like what how being the new breed of business. We're all about what God thinks and what he loves about business and what he hates about exploiting people and greed in business. So, how have you been able to use these skills to integrate with the biblical truth of how God is and how to embrace those standards as opposed to it's all about profits, it's all about promotion, it's all about self, it's all about pride, it's all about vanity? Tell us a little bit about how do you integrate faith when you go. I've seen it how you've done it inside of a Christian unity gathering. How do you do it professionally outside of that in, say, sport, military, business, what have you? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two parts of that, as you asked the question, Greg. And I think one, and so I think there's the leadership, peak performance excellence aspect of that, and then there's the financial side aspect of that in terms of what does God teach and how does that show up.
Yeah.
I think the first part is probably is easier for me to navigate because we used to it was amazing as different organizations would come spend time with us and want to learn from us when I was in Pittsburgh, and they were drawn to some of the principles we were teaching, and I would always share with them. I said, "Do you want to know where they come from?" And
There you
ultimately,
go.
they're biblical principles. We had a core group of players at one point in my time in Pittsburgh that were just on fire for Jesus, and they were consistently doing Bible study, and they joked about it was like they called it pyranity, but it was the Pirates adoption of Christian principles, and bring those to life. So that idea of following biblical principles, like what does God say about leadership? What does God say about this pursuit? What does God say about unity and cohesion and building a great team? Those things have been at the bedrock of my pursuit for a long time. So it's easy. That's who I am. That's the identity piece for me. And that's when I go spend time with leaders, that's what we're going to talk about. At some point, God opens the door for someone to ask some more questions on where does it come from and what does this mean for me? Because I think as you're pursuing these principles, right, at some point you come up against either you submit your life and surrender your life to Christ, to God, or you don't. And if you don't, well, then it's a real challenging fit. It's already hard to lead with these principles consistently. It's impossible to do unless you're in right relationship with God. So at some point, that's going to become a conversation and lead to that. The second part of it is the financial end. What does that look like from a business model? And I think there's a probably a few things where God has probably both protected me from myself and also laid some foundation for me to navigate this. I think, I'm a very driven, my wife would probably say obsessed individual. And I think he's protected me from that pursuit not being financial because of where that could go. And so to make sure my target isn't that, I think helps protect me. I think the other part of it is, whether it's humble beginnings of where I grew up, whether it's, my wife and I committing to the Dave Ramsey model of getting out of debt early and paying that off and the freedom that comes with that, to ultimately just from a faith perspective of trusting that God's going to provide. I've never worried about if I need, I'll go mow lawns tomorrow. If I, whatever it is to like making money for me has never been a concern. And so there's a faith perspective of God's going to provide, because he's blessed me with different gifts and he's going to open doors to be able to go do that. The challenge, I think, is more my wife and I navigating this. Having a check on the 15th and the 30th was way more stable and comfortable for my wife.
Sure.
Where I'm more comfortable, just I'm going to go deliver value and impact people and trust that God's going to take care of that.
Did you ever have opportunity when professionally to help guide things where people were too focused on the money, too focused on the profiteering? Like, was there ever story you remember, what have you, of when you were helpful in that regard and got people to focus maybe more back on what matters or the people themselves?
Yeah, I think the simple one is as I negotiated contracts with staff every year, and inevitably every year we would have some conversations of we were always having conversations around money, and and so that can go a bunch of different directions, whether that's going towards too much of a focus on my own career pursuits and recognizing, hey, as a coach or a leader, I'm a servant. I'm supposed to be pouring into other people's coaches and or other people's careers. So there's those conversations. I think the other conversation inevitably is, as somebody says, hey, I need X, I need a little bit more money. That then leads to opportunities to say, okay, well, how are you stewarding the resources that God's given you? And so inevitably, there'd be conversations I'd have with a coach every year of they'd like, hey, can you give me another $1,000? And I'd say, I'll give you another $1,000 if you change this one pattern in your life. Pick whatever it is. And they're like, come on, Kyle, what? I mean, what can't you just? And I'm like, I'm actually going to look to double your money if you do this. So there were opportunities to talk about how we were living and how we were, stewarding the resources we had, and not just how can I make some more.
Right. Interesting. So, one of the things we got into a little bit when we were together and then subsequently was the Storehouse Vision. And one of the aspects of the Storehouse Vision is to steward resources in a different fashion, where it's not all about the pursuit of profit or what can I get out of this, even if I take from somebody else. It's more of a communal type of model. It's more of a like, let's work together for the good. How do you think about these as potential opportunities? Like we talked a little bit about, but haven't got further into business development through kind of people coming together and investing differently. I mean, I'll just share as a lead into this. When I was remembering this morning in prayer, and in 2006, I was traveling from I think the Cape to Watkins Glen, New York. Watkins Glen is where the racetrack is, and this is my first uh, whatever you want to say, first competitive wheel-to-wheel racing that I had done that weekend. And one of the things that was going on with me is the Lord was speaking to me throughout the weekend about what he cares about and so forth. And it's interesting because I'm writing now some of these experiences that led to the epiphanies of what God values that's maybe different than the business values. And these two phrases came to me at that time. The first one was giving plus blessing equals enterprising. And I think what the Lord was saying in this is kind of weird and like, that's weird. Why did I hear that? I've never even thought of that word, enterprising. But I think what God was showing in that now, with the benefit of hindsight, is this integration of resources with people. So in America, we've more and more focused on how can I get money, and once I have money, then I can do what I want with money. I can have freedom through the money. There's this separation of money from people oftentimes. And so what God was saying is, even in your giving, Greg, I want you to think about it in a multiplicative fashion. So enterprising is the definition of which is like to, in a sense, grow and multiply through a business venture or through some kind of opportunity. And so when God is saying your financial giving or your resources gets combined with your involvement personally and a blessing to whomever you're working with or giving, that leads to multiplicative growth in eternal things. And so I had very much a mindset of like, I have this much income, I give this much, my tithe is 10%, my giving beyond that is these things and those things. And it was like a different, I didn't quite understand what the importance of that was, but I think that's what it was about. Then the other thing he spoke to me during that season, during that race, like leading into it, was I never take stock in anything without first taking stock in a person. And that word stock or invest was really talking about, like, my pursuit at that time, being a hedge fund manager, is what are the opportunities around the world to trade, to invest. And it's looked at mainly as an analysis game, whether technicals, fundamentals, a trading game. It has very little to do with people. And so this again was an epiphany. Like, okay, wait a minute, God, you care about investing, but you're saying that you'll never do it for the money. You're only going to do it when you first invest in a person. So both of those, with the giving side and the investment and capital development side, which is all principles of the storehouse, though God is really talking about a reintegration of people together with the resources is what he is doing. That's what he wants to do. And it always comes back to the people. The resources are secondary. But he's essentially saying, like, if you look at it the opposite of that, you're a lawyer, so you look at it logically, the opposite of what God is saying is, I don't get involved. I don't add my favor and multiplicative benefit when it's all about the money, whether it's giving, even to a good cause, or it's investing. So, anyhow, we've had a lot of conversations about what the storehouse looks like. What are some of your thoughts and creative thoughts and, like, green skying it a little bit, even in Bradenton or wherever? What do how do you see some of this? Because I feel like the Lord is really opening up some opportunities if we'll hear him.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that I continue to I'd say I've got some guiding thoughts as I navigate this space, without necessarily a clear system, if you will. And I think, to be honest, that's probably God continuing, because my default is to create systems and processes, and he's probably trying to break some of the rigidity of that. Because I think some of what you're talking about, that if we over process, systematize, whatever it is, we don't have room for the Holy Spirit to work, right? And so I think there's an element of that for me. I think, and I love as you talk through this, because I think one of the biggest evolutions for me as a leader is that whole take stock in the person first. I think I always, as a leader or as a coach, said the right things about caring about the person, whatever else. But if I'm honest with myself, I probably cared about the mission more. And my wife squared me up one time. She flat out said to me, she said, "You don't love people enough." And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm a Christian. What are you talking about? I don't love people enough. And what her challenge was no, if that person it fits into the mission you're on and can help with that, you pour into them and whatever else. But beyond your mission, you're just not aware and connected the way you need to the bigger body of Christ. And so I think some of what you're talking about there reinforced for me in terms of it is about the person first and foremost. But I think a lot of times we've gotten so isolated in our world. And you just even you look at communities, right? In terms of what was God's plan for community, you work together, you ate together, you lived together, you worshiped together, and now our communities are so spread out. I can live over here. My kids go to school over here. I work over there. We go, do whatever recreation over here. So we're not really truly in community. And so I think for me, it's a one of the things that continues to crystallize for me, and one of the things I've seen God do with me is break down some of those walls and bring people together across different arenas, across different spaces to figure out, you know what, we're all people, we're all dealing with the same challenges, and how can we solve problems together? Um, what does that look like financially? I think that's when we break down some of those walls and divides. I think that frees up God's resources to flow the way He wants them to. I had a guy say to me one time, which really squared me up, of God does not have a resource problem. He's got a distribution problem because He works through us and we're the problem. And so when we get really focused on my mission, my agenda, my space, mine, instead of truly a steward mentality, there's blocks to how those different interactions. I love the multiplicative effect idea. And the only way that can happen is if we don't have blocks, we're not in our pods, we're freed up and connected with each other.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things that came to mind just as you're speaking now, which is back to another baseball analogy. So we're going back to Little League. And I remember when our oldest son, Ryan, who was a really good baseball player, he kind of got short shrifted in not getting into the next league up where some of his buddies in his class were getting into. And what they did as a consolation was they said, okay, well, we're going to award you to manage the team at the lower level. And that was kind of this quid pro quo. And I was like, well, that's so anyway, what we ended up with was this collection. It's like the Bad News Bears, this collection of kids ranging in the spectrum of ability, right? Our team, by the way, incidentally, was called the White Knights. So I'm thinking about that. That's probably not a coincidence. So, so we had this team, and I remember the Lord was telling me, now think about the least of the team instead of the greatest. And the equation here and the power of it is if you can bring up and coach up and get people involved with the worst skills or ability up to any kind of level higher, the whole team is going to perform better. So don't just focus on the stars, your son. Focus on really being a father to these kids who need help, who need help doing like a little bit. If they could just contribute a little bit more, that equation will benefit the whole team. And this is a little bit like the body of Christ, I feel, is like God is saying all parts are important. Some are presentable, some are less presentable, but are there to work together. And when the whole team can improve, that improvement can actually win championships and or in the sense of the kingdom, be more effective in terms of winning souls. So we ended up having a great run. Ryan did a great job pitching and all that, and we won that championship in Little League. And I knew it was like God at work rather than just me, because the next year I also had an opportunity to coach and we didn't win. And so I'm like, well, I guess that's not always the case. What we had last year was special. But it just reminds me of this team idea. And when you're saying, if you're focused on zeal, performance, excellence, people who are the best, that's good. But what about the others on the team who are never going to be that Daniel, that person who's outstanding in every capacity, that David, So I think that's what that reminded me of when you were talking about Heather, who's great by the way, saying, "Hey, listen, pause. It's not just if you're zealous for a person because of their results, like they're really buying what you're selling, you love on them, but what about, how do you really feel about all the people?
Well, and I think, when we went into Pittsburgh, I'd say traditional development, traditional minor league development was you need to. It's about your best players. You need to get your best players to be the best. And we just we challenge ourselves to flip that on its head in terms of, hey, we want to create an environment where every player can reach their potential. And so and for two big reasons with that. Well, I'd say three big reasons. I think one, you hit the nail on the head. We'll talk all the time about the weakest link idea. Well, we better be investing in the weakest link then.
Right.
So are we trying to impact the whole? Can the whole be greater than the sum of its parts? So there's got to be an environment and a commitment to them. I think the second reason why it motivated us was the vast majority of these guys weren't going to play in the big leagues, and so our investment in them, if we were looking at purely from a short term perspective, we were missing bigger impact. Ultimately, for me, kingdom impact. And so we challenged our guys to see if this is we're raising up the next generation of coaches, fathers, leaders, and that's what our investment is, not just in who's going to play in the big leagues. And I think the third thing for us was it was a reminder for us to stay humble. We're just not very good at identifying who the best are going to be. Until recently, no first overall pick in the Major League Baseball draft had become a Hall of Famer. Never until Ken Griffey Jr. And so as you look at that, you're like, okay, history tells us we're not good at saying this is the one I should invest in or this is the one I should invest in. I want to try to create an environment where we are helping everybody thrive and be the best they can be. Now, I need to individualize. Different people need different things from me as a coach and as a leader. But if I'm only focusing on one or two people, I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. I'm going to miss opportunities for God to do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah, that's really great to hear that and to emphasize it. One of the other things about the Storehouse vision that I'll just share as part of this is when we were getting some of the original inspirations of how to set up the New England Storehouse. One of the things the Lord showed in a dream that I had was this idea of the people who are underserved in America, in our communities, in our cities, are typically the bottom 40%, roughly speaking, of those in terms of income and wealth. And what I was shown was the inner city of Chicago, and there were many multifamily houses, and we were going by in this train in the dream, and I could tell that this is a dense area. Families were living together. It was multi-generational. A lot of it was immigrant and ethnic communities. And essentially, the message was these are the neglected, Milton Friedman neglected economic part of the banking and financial and economic spectrum. And what I care about is for them to have more opportunity, for them to have a place where they can get productive financing, not aggressive financing, overcharging in terms of interest and fees, and really squeezing people. Things like payday loans, things like aggressive interest rates, subprime lending. A lot of what led into our prior financial crisis was taking advantage or exploiting those people, which God calls wickedness. And in the kingdom of God, it's the other way around. It's like, let the rich make sacrifice to help the poor, rather than let the rich develop systems and processes and trading to exploit the poor in pricing and squeezing and eking out more interest and so forth. And so this idea of helping the least of these, when you help the least of these, you are blessing me, you are helping me. And how, again, this idea of in the community, which is like a team, if we can help the weakest of these and turn them into people who are coming out of debt, who are productive for the kingdom of God, who can then become investors and people who enter into a surplus and join in with the rest of the community, we're really going to increase effectiveness in people's lives. And so I think this is part of that vision, is to really look at it in the upside down fashion, which is the world always looks for what's the opportunity that puts me at the top where I can get the most money from those in my pyramid, those in my downline, those in my organization, my corporation, my company. Um, a lot of it is focused like that. And God is saying, I want you to take what I've given you and I want you to think about how you can help people finance their needs or help them come out of debt. And that is truly what I care about. So it's interesting because it's like a different strategy and approach. It does not say having business and profit is wicked. It doesn't say that at all. It just says those of you who have more turn around and develop systems and processes and ways of getting people into a better position so the community can come up higher. And out of that, much can get done, much more can get done for the kingdom of God, I think, too.
Well,
So,
and I think
yeah,
that same thing is a parallel with from a leadership model, right, Greg, in terms of we can look at it from a financial benefit perspective. I think the reality is most of us as leaders at some point are pursuing those positions for the wrong reasons because of the benefits. We used to always talk with our guys about rights versus responsibilities. Leadership is ultimately about assuming more responsibility as opposed to trying to get more rights. And I think a lot of times the pursuit is about the rights, the benefits, the power, the everything that comes with it. And you realize it when you really lean into leadership, it's no, you're getting a bunch more responsibilities. Nobody cares about your well-being, everything else. All that we care about, because you got a bunch of selfish people focusing on their own problems that are now your problems. And so I think the same thing applies from a leadership perspective, right? Am I trying to be at the top of my pyramid from a benefits perspective? Or have I flipped that on its head and ultimately recognizing that my job is to create opportunity for all my people that I have been entrusted with, that I'm shepherding to go achieve and accomplish and do as opposed to my own accomplishments.
come up higher. Hey, this has been great. I wanted to open this up now for a little Q&A, a little discussion. If anybody has anything they want to ask Kyle. I know Amanda is a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, so Amanda, welcome. And do you want to, what say you about the Pirates? What we're talking about
My
here?
brother is actually a season ticket holder. He
Very
got,
nice.
yeah. So we actually went out for my dad's 70th birthday. We flew out. I'm in Rhode Island, so there's direct flights. We flew out as a family and went and saw a game. It was pretty
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, it's a
There's
beautiful
not too
stadium.
yeah, there's not too many better places to watch a game
Oh
than
yeah,
PNC.
yeah. So I'm excited about this just because I kind of fell victim to credit cards when I was 18 working in retail, and they really prey upon uneducated people and also young people that don't even have the income to sustain like the debt, because when you're working in retail, you're not making much and they encourage you to buy the clothes. So I kind of fell into that. And then you go to college and they literally had tables out selling you credit cards, selling you debt on top of your education debt. And you don't really think of it, when you're 18, you're just like, oh, mom and dad, aren't here. And, there's parties and there's just, going out to dinner and all these things. And you become part of that culture of just overconsumption.
Hmm.
And especially with social media, because that came about when I was,
Yep.
I was 18, then Facebook opened up. So that was a really big trend that I saw a lot of people kind of falling victim to. And still a lot of people I know are struggling with that. And so I think the Storehouse is a really great opportunity. Um, I own a marketing agency,
Okay.
and a couple years ago, I'm getting divorced, so I've been living on my own for like 2 years with my two boys, and trying to run my business, which was part-time until I moved out and had to make it full-time. And my FICO score tanked. So I was at 850 for a long time, even though I had some like credit card debt. And when I moved out, like emotionally, I wasn't okay. So I missed some payments. And my score was just like plummeting. Not that I didn't have the money to pay it. And, Greg talks about how we become enslaved to this score that really doesn't care about your character. It's just this like fictitious number that just is. And, God forbid you get your identity stolen or something happens. That's like, because some of the debt that I have is my soon to be ex-husband's like responsibility to pay. but that's money that is showing up on my, school, my almost like permanent record kind of,
Yep.
and it's affecting me. I didn't get a car loan recently because of it. And like fortunately, like my dad like loaned me the money so I would pay him back, which is Greg was explaining that kind of in itself is like a kingdom loan.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a good faith, it's something I would do for my children someday should they need it. And I think that this is a really cool opportunity to help people that, you know, circumstances happen. And so I want to know like how I can help, right? So my God-given gift is connecting people. And I've never found a way to sustain myself and like profit off that. I'm starting to learn now. I've read a bunch of sales books. I'm really good at the initial sale, but then the closing, I'm like, I kind of shy away because I don't want to like rush people or, Um, and when I first got saved, I was trying to sell salvation to everyone. Quota. And my friend's like, this is not about you. Like, this is
Let's
about
get some scalps.
that's what I really I was like going into mostly like courier service, like USPS, FedEx, and just invite people to church and like chatting with people. So I'm very excited about this, but I'm trying to see how I fit into helping this start and also, um, yeah, I connecting people and I have a meeting next week with a guy who's a VP of Bank of America, and he does very well and he's on fire for God and he's just a really great guy. So I'm gonna share this New England like storehouse with him because I think he just got back from Libya on a mission trip, and I think he would be like a perfect person to be involved with the New England storehouse because he knows money. He, he's also like a big kind of like philanthropist and gives back in the community. But I long-winded question. How can I help and like what can I do to help be a part of this?
Yeah, I'll share two thoughts just as you were talking, and then love to hear Greg's perspective. Um, I think for me, one of the things that so as you were talking about the sales piece and then soften at the end, I think one of the things I've tried to do is to communicate to people, if you will, the market value of whatever, along with the flexibility of, hey, if our needs and passions are lining up, we'll figure out a way to make this work. But I do think it's important at times. What I've found is to provide some context for people as you're potentially providing a service that people may not have any idea how much that service might be, quote unquote, worth. It's not about trying to play by rules of the market, but it's just to provide some context so that we can then try to figure out how do we come up with something that helps both sides. You're getting what you want, where I'm being able to give and bless you, and then you're being able to do the same with me. I think the other part of it that has helped me navigate some of this has been this idea: I'm not for everybody. God's not using me to get everybody.
Yeah.
And so one of the phrases I'll use with people is the idea of going with the goers. I'm going to go with the people. Like, this is where God has positioned me and where he's got me moving. And if that lines up, great, let's go. And if not, you know what? I can probably point you in the direction of some other people that might be able to help you better than I can. And so I think that freedom for me of not feeling like, well, I have to get everybody, or it has to work, or I've got to figure out a value that makes sense for everybody, is no, that's not on me. I'm gonna God's gonna open doors and align me in specific spots, and my job's to make sure I steward those well. But that it's not about trying to get the next sale or every sale or whatever else, as much as it is finding alignment of what the pursuit you're having, the pursuit I'm having, and where can we potentially help each other out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Because in the beginning of my business, I was trying to serve everyone
Yeah.
and I was discounting and just because I like to help people.
Yep.
And it ended up hurting me
Yep.
because I'll be like, oh, yeah, you could take a month to pay, but I wasn't in a position to do that. So then it ultimately hurt me because then I was faced with interest or different issues. So I've kind of curbed that and learned.
It's been interesting, Amanda, as you're talking, like God blessed me and blessed us to have some runway where I still had contract for 2 years as I transitioned to this. But I've told people whether I had that or not, I don't think it would have changed. I'm not going to work with somebody just to work with somebody, because then we're becoming a slave to the paycheck and whatever else. And I've got to trust that God's going to have me in the areas He wants to have me in to advance His purposes. And I think a lot of the times, one of the things we actually talked about at the event that Greg and I met each other at was to continue to challenge myself. Where do I have one foot in the kingdom and one foot in Babylon? And I think a lot of times we're like, God, I'm trusting you, but I've got one foot in the world as well. And it's like I'm frustrated with God, and God's looking at me going, dude, jump both feet in here and we'll go. So I think for me, it's been continue to just challenge myself and reflect. And I think that'll be the rest of my life, continuing to reflect because we are in this world.
Yeah.
But to
They say it's
reflect
a
where,
constant battle, you know?
yeah, yeah,
I definitely relate to that, and I appreciate you saying that because I feel conflicted with that too. You know, the like ha having to like pay these expenses and do these different things, and there's certain people that I want to serve, you know, and sometimes there's a longer like lead time to working with those people, especially some of the bigger companies. But I found like my business card says faith driven. And I can't tell you how many people, how many clients I've got from including that. And
yep,
also too, how many businesses I now see clients of mine that are now talking more about their faith in their business.
that's
So I did
awesome.
a crew at my church and they talked about integrating the kingdom into your professional life. Not just being a go to church on Sunday, read the Bible every day person, but like integrating your two worlds together. And I feel as though there's been a major shift having done that with my business, not only in confidence, but also just the way prospects are seeing me. Like I've had someone say like, wow, like, you know, there's just something about your eyes. Like I feel like I trust you. I went to a meeting the other day and the guy was just like, I don't know, I feel like I need to do business with you. You just seem like a really like trustworthy person. And he's like, I don't say that often. And I was late to the meeting because I it wasn't on my calendar and I was in gym clothes. I looked like probably a mess. And I was like, well, I'm glad you see that because a little bit of a hot mess today. And it's just experiences like that. And I talked about God in that meeting. I
That's
don't
awesome.
even know if either of them like are believers, but they were like, you know, yeah, faith is important. And
That's
they're like,
awesome.
that's cool that you're, you know, open and honest and confident about that.
Yep, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Greg, additional thoughts, different thoughts?
Totally. Yeah, I've got so many thoughts. So thank you both for underscoring a lot of important things. I'll just start with the credit score, right? So back for me in 2009 when we ran out of money and I couldn't pay my mortgage, I'm like, God, don't you want my mortgage paid? I've always been like the perfect person who pays all my bills. I've got a top credit score. I had equated the credit score with a character score according to God. And that's where the, I felt the Lord was breaking me of and abusing me of that notion by saying this, Greg, I don't care about your credit score. I was like, what? Like you don't care about my credit score? Like it sort of knocked my sensibility away, and I'm like, wow, what does this mean? And then as I had to wrestle with creditors coming after us, not having the resources to deal with it financially, right, or with money, God was saying, I got to teach you new tricks. And basically, when my in my complaining about the credit score stuff, God was saying, Greg, you're the best slave they've got going. And I was like, I'm a slave? I had no idea. So credit scoring is about making a computation with people and judging them based on their numbers and whether I can profit from them statistically. We're not a statistic. We are a people, and God looks at us covenantally in a relationship. So when we are in business, we too are to deal with people covenantally as family first and foremost, and not look at it as what can I get out of this person. You know, sometimes I joke like the lamb chop philosophy, which is like, hey, you might be my dinner, so I got to make take advantage of this opportunity. And so, like with that, I think we get into this concept, which is a stretch for us. This is a real stretch when we move from buying and selling, and even what Kyle's hinting at, which is good. Hey, if you're doing well and I'm doing well, we're all doing well. This is great, and that's true. But you know what's even more radical is what Jesus taught. He said, how about you help somebody and not expect anything from that? How about you lend to somebody, like your enemies, even, and you don't expect to be repaid? That's radical. But what we're doing when we do that is we're putting our trust in God rather than men or money. And when we even take it to that extent, so trusting that, hey, I could do this, and even if I don't get anything direct from it, and I might get like a benefit from it, but I'm not counting on that. I'm counting on God. By putting in that circuit breaker, we actually even can get more freedom, and God can take us to a place where we're not looking at it in the priority of how do I profit or make money or get revenue or take care of my family or my bills, but instead we're really looking at it as God does. He created the whole world from nothing. So can he not do this with us? And if we're willing to take that leap, especially amongst community, God then can use that and our faith and multiply it. Not for everyone's, monetary gain, but for the richness of trusting God and him opening up things. And then further, when we look at this and we wonder, well, why does God talk about money so specifically? Why does Jesus command us or tell us with in no uncertain terms? You either could trust me or you could trust money, but do not try to do both. It will not work. You have to choose. And this is tough in our culture. This is countercultural. And I think when we can get to that point of trust, faith, walk with God, where we're not looking at it as I have to do this or that to get this or that money, we come into a much greater level of freedom. And that's where we want to come into. That's the kind of place we want to be. And it's a journey. And as I love what you were saying, Kyle, we got to go with the goers. I sometimes refer to this as the coalition of the willing. We don't need to convince everybody of what God is doing, but for those who are willing and will take a risk and step out in faith, we need to encourage and develop them, even if we see that where they don't see it for themselves. Meaning, when we get kind of a whisper of from God, like this person's going to be important in what I'm doing, it's up to us then to father them and mother them into a place to develop them, to disciple them, where they can discover their God potential and the true heart that they have that God put in them. So I think that's really important in all this because if we still have most people 1 foot in, 1 foot out, the storehouse falls apart because then we're going to have, it's just like the scripture talks about, wherever you have infighting, jealousy, kinds of things where people are looking out for their own interests, every evil thing is there and it will not work. But when we can enter into it even more fully, being humble enough to admit, hey, I am good with the let's win together. I'm not quite there yet with the giving and receiving. Even if we're honest about that and humble and let God work with us, he can use that together for the good. But it's like as Kyle was saying earlier, when we come back to, well, my rights are I demand that this and that happen. I need this out of this if I'm going to contribute. We have to watch out because that can just undermine things. And so being a witness in all this is actually a great testimony when we realize, like you were saying, Amanda, that Monday through Friday is maybe even more important to God about how we act, who we are. We're going to preach the gospel through our actions, through what we do. And people are going to see that and sense that, kind of like you're saying that guy saw it in your eyes. It's like that's a favor of God. That's the care, the presence of God. And when we flow more by the Spirit than by the book of how to do business according to the MBA, I think we're going to get a lot further. And really, what's important is that eternally God loves that and wants to increase it.
Greg, something to add to. I love how you framed out. Not only is there a freedom from the transactional nature of things, I think there's also, if we come back to in terms of what is the standard that God expects, we're supposed to do everything under the glory of God. We're doing it for Him. So the standard there shouldn't be tied to a compensation or a transactional nature of things.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing for me as I navigate it being in the world and navigating some context on the front end, I don't ever want that to then impact the standard of care or the standard of um, whatever value I'm giving, that it shouldn't be tied to that, that it's ultimately tied to, to God's standard, and trying to make sure I'm operating in such a way that that's what the contribution is, and then trusting God's going to bless accordingly.
Totally. And I think even in church and ministry, people are unaware of how much worldliness or Babylon is present, especially when it comes to the financial model of things. And people get so anxious about, do we have enough money for budgets and what we're doing and how are we going to meet payroll and all these things. But God wants to have us enter into this faith trust walk that can transcend that. And I think when we conquer that in our own hearts, God can use us in a greater way. So he wants to release, Gary and I talk about this a lot. He wants to release more resources, but who is he going to release them to? For people who are still struggling and warring against, the way the world works, or one foot. No, he wants to do it with people who have clean hands and a pure heart, who are really not going to look at it as a lifeblood. They're going to look at it as it's just another way of helping people. It's just a tool, and we're not paying lip service to that. We really mean that because of the risk we've taken and putting our capital at risk. And I think that's critical for us to see more effectiveness in the world. So when people come into church, that's one thing and level, but when people see in our lives we're really trusting God like with everything, that's very impactful. And in the unity of that, the whole world will know that Jesus is Lord because he sees the love we have for one another. And the love we have for one another is to take those risks with what the world holds dear, but we hold loosely. And we say, no, we serve one who is greater than money. We serve one who can do things with or without money. I often use these, some people think they're extreme, means of demonstrating or saying that so people can really contemplate, meditate, understand that. It's not to say like, oh, money's evil. It's to say, no, it's our treatment and trust in it that becomes problematic. But when God can graduate us into a greater freedom, where we're flying on his power and his provision rather than worldly accumulation of wealth, that that's a whole new dimension of things. So it's about taking the Dave Ramsey idea of things. Let's be good stewards, come out of debt, and then go into not the stock market, but into the greater works that God would have with or without money, and being in a place where we're trusting God, not in our abilities or ourself or our money, because those things can get tied up too. So, been great talking about this. Any further thoughts from you guys? Princess or Gary, any comments or questions?
I have I don't know if you remember when Charisse first connected us,
Yes.
and I was very excited, and I was like sharing all the things like God had showed me. And you were like, I didn't have a name for it, and you put the name to it. You're like, oh, that God was showing you about a storehouse.
Huh.
And yeah, and so and it's funny because you guys said so many things. I remember when God first revealed to me that he was going to put me in business, and I knew nothing. I was definitely not the person, like if you met me, because people looked at me like, oh, you're like the girl from Legally Blonde. You're like the girl from Will Smith. And so, and the Lord, I would ask him, I would say, can you please change this about me? Because and I'm going to say Christians, how they would respond to me like, really, God's going to have you do what? Like, and when your identity is not really in him, you're going to be moved by how other people react to you, right? And so I would be like, God, can't you change this about me? Like, do you see how they're like, who's going to take me seriously? Like, they don't, they're like, why don't you just go shopping or something? And inside, I'm like, God, can we buy a mall and we can provide all these jobs? you know? And I was like, please change this about me. He said, no, I like this about you. We're going to keep this. He goes, I actually enjoy it. He goes, I like watching the whole thing unfold. I was like, okay, well, please help me to like this about myself because I'm struggling right now. But moving forward, I said to him, I said, okay, if you're going to put me in business, I want you to teach me not to take the person because we look at paper, right? The resume, Yale, Harvard, the graduate. And Kyle, you spoke about this. I didn't understand what I was saying, but I was speaking out of my heart to the Father. I said, I want to be able to look at a person and you say to me, that's the one. And even if they look, what if they're homeless and God's like, I want you to take that person and I want you to, whatever he wants me to do, whatever he wants me to do, I want to be obedient. And I just want to do that. I don't want to look at the resume. Like, what if God's like, because if you look at the resume, they're going to come in like really sharp, right? And say all the right words, right? And I'm not saying discriminate against that. What I'm saying is, I like God, I don't want to overlook because I saw how I was being looked at, right? Because I was the one that you would overlook, you know? You're like, oh, okay, are you like the executive secretary? No, I'm here for something. No, I'm not. Okay. So, I didn't understand what I was really saying to him, but he was going to walk me through it. And that's a transformation. And it began with the identity being in him. And when he revealed, he's like, your name is who you are.
Hmm.
And I don't mean, because you can go on the internet and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a princess. Hello. It's like, okay. So the Lord started to reveal the identity of royalty because a princess is royalty, a queen, king, that's all royalty, right? We understand that. But in the kingdom of God, it's about serving. And he began to teach me a princess, someone who is of royalty, looks at the people and she wants to serve them.
Hmm.
What can I do? She has full access. She has full access because her father is who he is. So she comes to her father and he gives, and so does she. She has full access. And I was like, okay, that sounds really good. But mind you, I was still immature, right? And he began and I seriously, if you ever seen the movie Legally Blonde, when you look at her personality, she was so naive. She couldn't believe people were mean. That's literally how I was. To me, like Christians, how can you be this way? You're a Christian. We're supposed to love one another. I had to, and Charisse will tell you, we have so many funny stories. I'd be like, Charisse, she would start laughing. She's like, I'm telling you, like, no, that's not in the Bible, and
Princess, we talked about this the other day. I've been burned so
yeah.
many times in business because I was that way. And I've just now, in the last year learned about discernment. So I pray for that multiple times a day. I'm like, every meeting I go into now, I pray. And I say, God, like, take this where it needs to go. Like, if this is a client for me, like, I'll know it. But yeah,
Right.
I got that too. Everyone's like, oh, you're too nice. You're so nice. And I got taken advantage of countless times. Got scammed $7,000 a couple years ago from a web designer. Just, just a lot of experiences like that where, people took my kindness as weakness.
Right.
And
So I'm sorry, I just want to finish.
yeah.
So because I don't want to lose that. So he began to take me through this transformation where when you get the mind of Christ is not naive. He Listen, the Holy Spirit will reveal to you not to, I call him sometimes like he's going to tell me. Like you could say whatever you want, but he's going to tell me. And we are to be, bold. He's like transforms you into this bold woman of him, right? And he begins to show me, he goes, yeah, so you look at the girl in Legally Blonde, but look at her at the end. He goes, so when you see yourself, you didn't see her coming. He goes, that's what I'm going to do with you. And, and transforming the heart, because when you go through that process, where people treat you, especially, and I'm talking about specifically in the church, because it hurts more. It hurts your feelings. We got to get over it. And we don't get offended. You bless people, you love them, and you just keep it moving. Right. And, and not allowing it to hurt your heart, but your heart becomes tender because he has you and your identity is in him. And it actually should make you more excited. And now, like right now, it's like my prayer life, what he has done and bringing me out of the world system, because you still have to get trained, because there's so much that God has to do, you know and and it's absolutely beautiful. And just listening, I mean, Greg, I can tell you now, like when Charisse told me, she's like, you really need to connect with this. Let me just contact him and let me connect you. And I was excited, because of the vision, and but there was still much that I had to learn. But now I can appreciate, it's like, well, now I have, you know, I can listen and really appreciate the wisdom and the similar, transformation, stories, and just like it's so refreshing. And there's people that I actually want to invite. I actually have a friend, this guy, he has a contract with Walmart, and he would tell me his stories, what he would go through, trying getting investors, from other believers, and the things that he would say to him. And he promised God that he would give 90% away,
Hmm.
which is, I know, it's like, wow. And yeah, so I actually want to invite him into this, because I was thinking about him. Because I think just having the connection, the community, even outside of that, because you may go to church, and a lot of the culture of this, it may not be in the church, where people go to church. So it's nice to be able to have this community where you can listen, and it's so refreshing, and just a reminder of what you're walking through, and to keep going, and to keep allowing God to empty you of
Yes.
everything, so that he can really be that distribution.
Right.
Because he doesn't have, he's fine, but he needs, like, seriously, like, be empty and have the care, allow him to just develop your character, because that's like so important. People need that, is having the character and just being empty of yourself, so when they look at you, they see something different, and it doesn't go to your head. You lift him up, you stay low.
Right. And I think that's like what you were saying earlier when the Father was speaking to you. I don't want you to change in this way. Like, who am I? I'm nobody. Like, how am I going to succeed or do well? I don't want you to change. I think that reminds me of Matthew 18, verses 3, 4, and 5. Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That
Hmm.
is a strong statement about, do not put yourself into a place where, hey, if I have all this knowledge and I acquire all this ideas and leverage, like then I will be somebody great. God is saying, no, if you remain childlike, um, you can enter into the kingdom of heaven. A little bit is like the rich man is difficult to get into the kingdom of heaven because it's like a trying to pass through the eye of a needle. It's like a similar idea.
Right.
Or whoever takes the lowly position, that's humility. That's another way of saying it. Of
Yeah.
this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So in the world, who's the greatest? Person who has the most money, most famous, most celebrity. But in the kingdom, it's totally different. And whoever welcomes one of such a child in my name welcomes me. So a community of humility where we continue to allow God to work on us and wash over us in waves, emptying ourselves, like you were saying. So these things are all truth. And anyone who's listening to this, by the way, you can join in on these discussions. Just email us. It's on the website. It's in the write-up for this the YouTube and so forth. But yeah, anybody else have some further thoughts here? Or Princess, if you want to respond, please do. Or Kyle, any closing thoughts? Anybody else?
I think the one thing, just as Princess was talking about, I've spent time with thousands of coaches and asked them, or thousands of athletes, and asked them the best coach they've ever been around and why. And you hear a lot of different reasons, but the one common thing that I've gotten over the years has been consistency. They knew what they were getting from that coach or leader. And the only way we can be consistent is if we know ourselves and we're secure in our own skin, right? And I think a lot of times on this journey of leadership, we admire this leader or that leader or this coach, and so we try to copy those attributes. And those are stylistic differences as opposed to how has God uniquely made me. Again, getting back to the identity piece, we would talk with our guys about, you got to know yourself, you got to like yourself, and you got to consistently be yourself. We start with self-awareness. That like yourself really is ultimately having a healthy tension between, sometimes we like ourselves too much and we get caught up in our own strengths and attributes, or sometimes we don't like ourselves enough. And really that's dishonoring God as well by saying, you didn't make me the way I think you should have made me. And so having that appreciation for how has God uniquely wired me so that I can go consistently be myself. And really when you step back and you think about what are our people asking from us as leaders, they want consistency. They want to know what they're going to get on a consistent basis. And so, but that starts again in self-awareness and security and identity in the creator who made us, as opposed to my own strengths and abilities.
Totally. That's great. I mean, there's no greater example than leadership of Christ and the Father and the Holy Spirit. So appreciate your words, Kyle. This has been awesome to talk to you more. Look forward to further things with everybody here in the community. And just really appreciate you, Kyle, and your story and your roots in Pennsylvania. And God bless you guys today. Anybody
I
else have
appreciate you having me on, Greg. Thanks.
yeah, great to see you guys.
Thanks, Kyle. Go Pirates.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very encouraging to hear.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Like, I cannot tell you how encouraging your story was. It
Awesome.
was like, thank you, God.
God is good.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we'll see you guys. God bless you.